What is your worst experience with a homeowners association? My cousin is pretty well off and bought a nice house in a brand new neighborhood under the control of a HOA. Over the last 15 years, many shenanigans have occurred, but the absolute worst happened in November last year. The HOA illegally applied for, and received, credit cards for most of the homeowners in the neighborhood. They then use these cards to hire contractors for fixing outstanding issues in the neighborhood, like mending slightly damaged fences, washing windows, cleaning chalk off sidewalks, and replacing weathered spigots, all without the homeowner's knowledge or consent. They actually would verify that the homeowner was away from home before the contractors would show up. Then people started getting credit card statements for cards they had no knowledge of. The lawyers are still putting together their cases. The HOA at my parents' old condo decided to ban the use of parking spaces indefinitely. People assumed they were being repainted or something, but eventually it was discovered that the buttholes on the board thought the complex would look nicer if everyone parked on the road. But of course, the two parking lots next to the board member's house weren't closed. Changing the HOA rules was intentionally set up to be difficult. Meetings could only be held at 11 AM on workdays. All adult residents of a house had to be present or that house's vote input was invalid. Crap like that. In protest, people made sure the lots by the board members were constantly filled with cars so they would have to park on the road too. Eventually it culminated with the board illegally towing a bunch of cars. They wrote a new rule about how long cars could be parked in spaces and posted a notice on every door in the complex. The new rule was no car could be parked in the same spot for more than 48 hours, but they decided that the timer was retroactive, and on the very morning the rule was made immediately started towing any car that had been in a space for the previous 2 days. The condo complex where I grew up was composed almost entirely of low-income Mexican immigrants illegals, and low-income white trash M-heads. Half the cars towed were either custom lowriders or custom trucks jeeps. A bunch of the lowriders were damaged in the process of towing, and one of the jeeps straight up went missing, apparently stolen by or from the tow company. A tow company, incidentally, later found out to be owned by a board member's brother. I was just a kid, and only got the full story much later in life. But all the members of the HOA board got the crap beaten out of them, and had their cars stolen and intentionally wrecked. The way it was explained to me was that they were left on the board, but told their rule-making days were done. But hey, silver lining. The racial divide that used to split the complex in two basically disappeared after that. The Mexicans started inviting us to their giant picnics and the whites started inviting them to game night keggers. Apparently the secret to race relations is forming a biracial mob and beating people up. More HOA stories should end with a mob. HOA had roughly $150,000 in the bank with annual expenses of less than $40,000 which was fully covered by monthly dues. The first meeting I went to, the president introduced a motion to remove the requirement for the HOA to have an outside accountant audit the books annually. He claimed the $500 or so that it cost was an unnecessary waste. I freaked. This was pre-Archer but I ranted something like, do you want embezzlement? Because this is how you embezzle money. I continued that I was very uncomfortable with the HOA holding so much money and I suggested we do something with it. Maybe build a playground on common property. I did not have kids at the time. The council said that was not possible because of liability if a kid gets hurt, and they have to save to someday replace sidewalks. Sidewalks were less than 5 years old at the time and in perfect condition. When I asked they had no idea on costs to replace sidewalks. Had not even looked into it but they were sure it was expensive. The crazy thing is that I actually got booed. The other attendees wanted to move past the boring budget stuff so they could rant about whose dog crap on their lawn. So I sat down and listened to about a half hour of dog poop detective work before I left. I never went to another meeting and moved about 18 months later. Maybe not a great story but I thought it was pretty horrific. My favorite is our friend's house here in California, where there's a severe drought and a ban on lawn watering. Guess whose HOA insisted that people still water their lawns last summer, despite the city publicly saying they will fine anyone who does so. Water your lawn equals city fines you, as well as using up precious water. Don't water your lawn. HOA fines you. I read stories on this, an article about a couple that face fines from the city for watering their lawn during the drought. Then the HOA went after them for not upkeeping their lawn, i.e. it was dead from not watering. The ironic part was the city and Hoa fines were the same amount. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Our neighborhood Hoa started out with well-meaning rules, but then they started adding things, like not having your garage door open without working in there, regulated the number and color of planter's pots you could have, and even what kind of plants and height restrictions. You also got fined if your bushes everybody had the same ones, got over 3 feet high, and yes, some jackass actually walked around with a ruler and cited a good third of the neighborhood one day. Not worst so much as most entertaining. Our Hoa these days doesn't do much beyond basic safety stuff, like keeping street signs upright, and enforcing rules about curb appearance, no statuary or fountains, keep your grass trimmed, that sort of nonsense. And they're pretty tame about that. According to some of my neighbors, they were much more aggressive when the neighborhood was founded 40 years ago. Our neighborhood is split in half by a strip of forest, and right in the middle of this strip is a house owned by a guy I will call Jeff. Now Jeff was a manager at a local park, and a real Ron Swanson type. Jeff bought his strip of forest a few years before the subdivision was conceived, and thus Jeff is not subject to any of the Hoa's rules and regulations. However, this was not going to stop the plucky young man who founded our Homeowners Association. No, he was determined that our neighborhood would follow certain standards, and Jeff was simply not living up to these standards. His yard was overgrown and crawling with local wildlife, and he kept a boat in his driveway. The nerve. Well, the president of the Hoa was not having this. He arrived on Jeff's doorstep one day with a packet containing all of the standards the Hoa expected its homeowners to live up to. These were such things as no window boxes, no front-facing vegetable gardens, blah blah blah. Jeff looked over the packet, calmly informed the president that he would make a note of the regulations, and shut the door in his face. The first thing that went up was a fence. Not a solid fence, mind you, but a board and rail fence, so that you could see what else Jeff was up to. This prompted the first of many letters from the Hoa to Jeff. After he got that letter, he put up a vegetable garden, front and center. Another letter arrived, and Jeff started renting out space on his lawn for people to store RVs and boats. Another letter, and Jeff put up window boxes. I don't know exactly how long this went on, but eventually it escalated to the police. As soon as they found out that Jeff was the proper landowner, they laughed in the Hoa's face. Then it escalated into a civil suit about property values or whatever, and the judge dismissed the case on similar grounds. Nowadays, Jeff is retired and putters around his house day in and day out, filling up hummingbird feeders, replacing light bulbs on the Christmas lights he keeps strung up 365 days a year, run off a huge solar panel planted in his front lawn, naturally, and just generally being an awesome old dude. And our Hoa has basically been neutered by the whole ordeal, and hesitates to file a complaint against even the most egregious violations. I'm looking at you, family that clearly runs some sort of business out of their garage. Jeff sounds like one badass sob I'd like to have a beer with. I used to live in a neighborhood called Quiver Falls in Kansas. The Hoa that managed it was run by a crooked president who, allegedly, stole millions of dollars and failed to provide required maintenance on people's homes because the Hoa was broke. A couple members of the community finally sued, but before discovery could occur all the financial records for the Hoa were lost. Also, the president ended up dying of cancer prior to trial, so there wasn't anything that could be done to recover the Hoa dues. Aprix $200 a month for a few hundred units, paid by homeowners in the community. The situation got so bad it made the local news and led to new laws being passed in KS regulating how Hoas must operate and what kinds of financial records must be kept. Cancer, sure. Endless rules. Left newspapers in your driveway. Letter in the mail so you know about the problem in a week. Grass growing in the driveway cracks. Letter. Grow pineapples in the planter box. Letter. Park weird. Letter. Grass is grown a little bit. Letter. The Hoa guy lives across the street. This would drive me up the fricking wall. I hate when people power trip and when there are stupid rules in place. I've seen two types of Hoa. The normal one is the one that you never notice. It's $20 bucks a year, and they throw some kind of summer BBQ. They don't get up to much, besides occasional asking somebody to mow their foot tall grass and the like. Then there is the other type of Hoa, The type that will write you letters and fines for anything possible. The type that wants nothing less than to drive you nuts. I personally think that they're a government conspiracy to teach Americans how to overthrow totalitarian governments. My hoe overcharged me $10 on a late fee, then overcharged me again, another $10 on the same late fee. No big deal, right? They then tried to foreclose on my house, charging me $2,700 in lawyer's fees to collect their $20. We had permission from the family who owned the land, not part of the HOA, next to us to park our camper and boat. You weren't allowed to have them in your yard or on the street. Can have them in garage. They tried multiple times to fine us, but every time we would point out that that land was not under their jurisdiction and we had permission. They had people walking on our back lawn looking for things that broke the rules. My room was the only one on the bottom floor and faced the backyard. I woke up one morning and there was a strange man right outside my window. We found out who he was and called the HOA. Through liberal use of the phrase "my daughter is a minor" and trespassing, it never happened again. I don't live there anymore, but my aunt still does. The HOA still takes everyone's money, but doesn't any of the stuff they are supposed to, except hand out fines. They used to mow the common areas and make sure sinkholes were safely fenced off. They don't do any of that now. Fear does funny things to a person. Makes you insular. Makes you make anonymous phone calls about landscaping. Makes you pop the slat of your Venetian blind downward when you hear an idling engine because that car may park in front of your house, on your street. What will people think if they drive by and see your neighbor's laundry drying on a line in the backyard? They'll think you're some kind of lowlife immigrant by association. Can't have that now because you are a respectable person. Got to keep things nice. Nice. Everything nice. A nice brick walk free from weeds. A nice lawn mown diagonally instead of parallel. For parallel is so very last year. No work in the garage. That's for storing things, not making things. And certainly not fixing things. As a respectable person, you don't get your hands dirty. Fear the neighbor. Send a letter. Fear for your property value when you know you'll die there. Fear that someone out there is enjoying life instead of trying to keep it lined up, tidy, regimented, compartmentalized, covered in plastic and only brought out when nice people drop by to remark on how nice everything is. Keeping things nice, not beautiful, for that would cause controversy. People would talk, and that's not nice. Heck isn't fire, or ice, or torture. Heck is a marching band of uptight buttholes with leaf blowers. So tentacle acres. My hoe would send a letter about everything. Grass is 1 stroke 2 inch too high. Letter. Numbers on the house not sufficiently reflective. Letter. UPS left a package on the porch. Letter. Have some friends over and an unapproved number of vehicles either driveway. Letter. The one that drove me the craziest was on trash day. The garbage men would inevitably knock over a can or spill trash that would then blow into my yard. Then I would get someone knocking on my door at stupid o'clock in the morning. These shenanigans led to the Great Mailbox War. I eventually received a letter demanding I repaint my mailbox. After checking the regs, I realized there was no specification as to color. That mother was electric purple the next day. Very next month I got another letter. So I switched it up and painted it Dayglow orange. Next month, another letter. Boom, now it's neon pink. This cycle continued for a year and a half before they gave up. My friend lived in one. You couldn't work on your car in the driveway, so we worked on his car and motorcycles in the garage. Door open so the HOA people. They lived across the street. That sucked. Could see but couldn't say anything. That annoyed them. That and their 2 teenage daughters loved my Harley and always wanted to ride on it. My last neighborhood was just like this, except you also couldn't leave your garage door open if you weren't actively working in there at the time. Both me and my neighbor, who did a lot of woodworking, got written up on the same day. I guess we both happened to be inside when the association president drove by. The dirty little HOA secret is they are created by the developer to keep people from doing anything crazy before they can sell off all the houses. They continue existing just because the developer sells this as a plus and not for its real purpose. I worked for one of these developers in the contracts side, and while I was lucky enough to not have to deal with HOAs, I got to hear a lot of horror stories. Probably the best was a man who would bring his lawyer to HOA meetings. He was rich, retired, and grumpy, and if anyone did anything wrong he brought his legal backing to make sure they were in check. The lawyer never did anything because after all it was a condo hoe in Florida. But I'm sure he didn't mind the paycheck he got for sitting there and listen to people complain about their neighbor's balcony mounted satellite dishes or starting construction work at 7:55 instead of 8. Had to fight to be allowed to make my home wheelchair accessible. Not even anything visible. Just a paved drive to the basement door. That's covered under ADA. They literally cannot enforce that. Fined us for having a non-regulation color curtain in the upstairs window. It was a blue curtain in a tan house. It could only be seen standing at a certain angle from across the street. Stuck will be towed notices on cars parked on the street. On Christmas. Tried to fine us for having our trash can out the day after trash day. We knew for sure we didn't because we were landscaping the backyard the whole week. Went to the meeting and brought up that point and were told, well, we can't always know for sure whose trash can it is. The cans had serial numbers on them. I was house sitting for my parents, and their subdivision had a hoa. I put the trash can out one morning for pickup, then went to work. I had errands to run after work, so I didn't get back to their place until almost midnight. When I got back, I put the empty trash can away. No big deal, right? Well, a few days later my parents got a letter from the hoa. Apparently some busybody didn't like that the empty trash can was left out for several hours after the garbage truck came. These people seriously need to get a life. I actually have a friend who lived in a neighborhood where you weren't allowed to put your trash by the street at all. You either had to store your cans behind your house, provided the garbage men with keys, or leave your garage unlocked on garbage day. As nice as it sounds, it is also incredibly weird at the same time. My parents live in a subdivision where most of the homes have an amazing view of a river that is nearby. The houses in the subdivision are all fairly large, but the biggest home is owned by a very rich farmer in the area. He's also a very high-ranking Mormon in his church, and several members of the subdivision are also Mormons. This guy decided he wanted to build a huge shed on his property where he could keep all of his dirt bikes, motorcycles, ATVs etc, but never asked the hoa for approval to do so, like he was supposed to. So he builds his giant shed, completely blocking his neighbor's view of the river, which is the main reason that a lot of people build homes in this subdivision. When the neighbor went to an hoa to have them file an injunction against Mormon guy, they refused. Their reasoning was that brother, farmer guy, would never do anything like that on purpose. We won't sue him. Buttholes. That's the kind of thing you'd need a township permit for. If he didn't have a construction permit, you can probably get the town to hassle him or tear it down. A hurricane tore through my sister's subdivision a few years back. Her hoa fined her for having tree limbs and other debris in her yard only one day after the hurricane. It was like a $400 fine she had to pay in addition to fixing the damage on her house. They also fined a house in her neighborhood that had its roof torn off for some other insane reason. Go to the news with that crap. Name and shame, especially after a natural disaster. My neighbor had a portable basketball hoop that his boys played with at the end of their driveway. After many orders to remove it from their property were ignored, someone from the hoa came and stole it from their yard. Neighbor was extremely pissed already, and that really set him off. He doused an hoa member's lawn, the guy across the street that was making the most noise about the hoop, with acid, killed his lawn. My security cameras caught the whole thing. I accidentally deleted the recording and helped my neighbor cement a new hoop in his driveway. Well, it's not that bad in comparison to what others have gone through, but it was bad enough that we moved to a non-hoa neighborhood after it happened. Basically, our gate to the side yard was pretty cheap and starting to fall apart. We didn't want to replace it with another cheap gate, and so we found a metalworking company that would create a pretty sweet version that would last darn near forever. Since it didn't cost any more and looked notably better, we decided to change the top to be a semicircle instead of flat across. Now, those of you who have had run-ins with hoas saw the word change and immediately knew that that was going to be a serious problem. Hoas don't like change at all. Indeed, the gate was rejected. The official rejection form just said that it needed to follow one of the approved designs, all with flat tops. But our neighbor was at the meeting where they discussed the change, and apparently the rationale was this gate looks far better than all the others on the block. If we allowed it, then it would lower the property value of the rest of the houses. A. It was rejected because it looked better than the others, and who looks at gates when it comes to deciding to buy a house or not? The absolute capricious nature of this decision was a final straw for us, and we started the house search to get out of there a few weeks later. I hope you took your awesome gate with you when you left. I hate HOAs because so many of them are terrible. I made sure to buy a house in a neighborhood without one as to not have to put up with their BS. This makes me feel happy for my HOA. Instead of meeting for everything small, they have a website set up and gave us accounts to vote. They'd email us when a new rule was being put to vote. They were also very kind about late fees and even offered to take community service as payment for back fees. After reading a bunch of these comments, I'm so glad I live in a working class neighborhood full of people with real problems. Our roads don't always get plowed as quick as I'd like, but as long as your yard isn't a disgusting jungle, you don't really get any static. My brother and I built an awesome tree house in a clump of forest next to our house. Some distant neighbor was walking their dog nearby while we were building it and heard the hammering and came to investigate. We were reported to the HOA, but when they came back to inspect it, they couldn't find it. It was built, it was painted camo, and it was a masterpiece of found lumber engineering. No matter, we got a summons to remove it anyway due to it being an eyesore. My dad was afraid of their wrath, with good reason. They were powerful, hateful old geezers, so he made us tear it down. Some tears were shed that summer. If you can find a treehouse in that forest, I'll tear it down. During college, I was interning at a golf course in a neighborhood, and one morning I was cutting the greens, and while I was riding from hole to hole I noticed a lot of vandalism. You could follow the joyride of destruction from hole to hole. The first green had a giant tear in it where someone had ran across it with a golf cart. The 150 marker had been run over on the second hole. The no cart path signs were destroyed on the fourth hole. This is also where I found a headlight for a golf cart. More on that later. On the 11th green, he had taken the flag stick and shook it back and forth while it was in the cup, causing the hole to become really big and breaking the flag stick. Just a lot of vandalism. Nearly $1,000 in damages. Well, since I had found a golf cart headlight, and it didn't match any of the course's carts, we knew it had to belong to someone in the neighborhood who owned a golf cart. We turned over the headlights to neighborhood security and they went around the neighborhood looking for the golf cart. But security comes back and tells us that they ended up finding the golf cart. The garage door was open and they notice a muddy golf cart with a headlight missing. Bingo. Got M. Gonna sue M, right? That's what we've been talking about all morning. Thinking that we're going to bag some 16-year-old kids? Wrong. The owner of the golf cart was hosting a bachelor's party the night of the incident. The driver of the golf cart just so happened to be a police officer in the county where the incident occurred. The POA decided not to press charges against the officer, and their logic behind it was they don't want to give the police department a reason to not respond to a call in the neighborhood. My superintendent was freaking P. If it was some teenager, they would have sued the kid for everything he was worth. If that same cop caught the teenager, he would have arrested him for it. Pretty freaked up situation. The cop had to give my boss an apology and pay for all damages in order to not have charges pressed. TLDR. Cop vandalizes golf course and HOA decides not to press charges in fear of the police department. When I moved into my condo 4 years ago, my HOA started at $250 a month when I looked at it. 1 month after purchase, I got a letter from the HOA saying per the vote 6 months back they were redoing the roofs and my HOA was increasing another $140 a month for 10 years. The walkthrough showed no issue with my roof. The condo paperwork mentioned nothing about this. The head of the association is one of my neighbors. When I asked him what this was, he said they were under no obligation to tell me when I was looking at the place just 1 month earlier. That's how the head of the HOA welcomed me to the neighborhood. Hi, pay us more. We don't have to tell you crap. I'm now paying $450 a month for my HOA. No pool, clubhouse, nothing but plowing and any outside repairs. Oh, and 8 months later he asked for my vote to be re-elected. He won. I've lived in 4 HOA developments so far with both good and bad results. First development was fiscally irresponsible. Board was made up of realtors and retired federal employees. Two of the wives wanted new landscaping at the gates every year, so annually they would hire a firm to rip out the old and replant expensive bushes. They never let anything grow beyond 4 feet, then would decide they hated the plantings and start the process again the next year at the tune of $50,000 annually. The community had 2 ponds, EPA mandated catch basins with pumps that service the entire development's sprinkler system. They sold the pumps off for $2,000. Forcing the residents to connect to city water. Would get on residents for parking a plain Ford Ranger in the driveway, saying it was a commercial vehicle since it had commercial plates. Total power trips and dues went up 4x in less than 5 years. The next development was well run and fiscally managed. Overall a great neighborhood. HOA covered everything from snow removal, roof replacement, lawn service, clubhouse, 2 pools, indoor and out, tennis courts, etc. all for $265 a month. Current HOA is again well run and fiscally managed. Advice is do your homework before you move in. Ask for 5 years of prior budgets. Walk the neighborhood and ask the neighbors what they think of the development, area, board, etc. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.